Kim has more than 25 years of business and technology consulting experience and has worked across many industries, including banking, insurance, manufacturing, power, and utilities. Her resume includes 5 years with a global software vendor, leading the cross-industry Canadian and then North American financial service consulting teams. Kim was also on the management team of the Canadian operations of a global outsourcer. As E&Y's technology practice, she works with clients across Canada and the US to advise on the alignment of business strategy with technology execution for improved processes, outcomes, and insights. Kim is a frequent speaker on disruptive technology at E&Y and industry-sponsored events across Canada. Next up, we have Faraz Rasheed. Faraz is a data and artificial intelligence architect at Microsoft Canada, helping enterprises build cloud-based data science solutions. Prior to joining Microsoft, he built and led big data analytics team at TD Bank and BlackBerry. Faraz has extensive experience building solutions based on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and advanced analytics. He holds a PhD in computer science with a focus on machine learning. And last but not least, we have Glenn Sawyer. Glenn is the National Director of IoT Digital Transformation at SAP Canada. Glenn is a 20-plus year tech industry veteran and a trusted advisor to companies in oil and gas, utilities, mining, and manufacturing. In that role, he helps businesses find new efficiencies in their operations using emerging digital technologies. Glenn joined SAP Canada in 2010 and today leads a team developing solutions in IoT, machine learning, and artificial intelligence that are focused on improving people's lives and transforming the way the world works. Collaborating with a range of organizations from large enterprises to small municipalities, he has gained vast knowledge in how digital ecosystems improve productivity and what it takes for businesses to succeed in the new economy and what positively impacts people. Prior to SAP, Glenn launched 2 successful tech startups. So welcome to the panel, and just before we start, we'll commence our discussion, and then we'll have a series of questions and answers after each topic area, if that works for everyone. Okay, so here we go. Much easier to be a little bit more casual. So our first topic today is cloud computing. So, I guess, Glenn, what are the emerging trends that you're seeing in cloud computing?
Sure, yeah. You guys hear me okay at the back? It's okay. Thumbs up from the audio guys? Okay, great, thanks guys. So the key trends that we're seeing is that business needs more flexibility, speed, better solutions, but it can't just be a macro statement, it needs to be actually at the micro level. What I mean by that is to be able to build, extend applications for every department and every user in that department, both economically and rapidly. So frankly, the consensus is cloud is absolutely, without contest, the future. But we also have customers that are 40-plus year legacy customers of a 40-year-plus young software company that are not going to immediately abandon their ERP legacy. A perfect example would be a customer like Department of National Defense. They're probably, for sensitivity reasons, not going to jump to the cloud, but are very comfortable with having this within the 4 walls of their own domain and DMZ. So because of that, we've actually been practicing a very balanced approach to cloud versus on-prem. And some customers, as I said, will never ever change in their lifetime. But business purpose applications, line of business applications that are cloud-based seem to be the definitive trend on the adoption side. And I'll give you a good example is in supply chain. And one of our fastest growing segments is a product called Integrated Business Solutions, Integrated Business Planning specifically. And what that does is it allows you to look at demand activity expectations in the marketplace for your products, and then be able to balance that with real-time supply chain optimization and visibility. Actually, Maura, I'm proud to say, Mel is actually one of the customers that use the solution very effectively today, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But the question I get from people is, so where do I start? So I would suggest you look at the strategic imperatives of your organization and the cloud solutions that line up to that. This is not your traditional father's Oldsmobile scenario. These are solutions that go in very quickly, rapidly, agile. And you can have the first stage of a go live in 6 weeks. As a matter of fact, the go live for supply chain and the Bell Mobility handsets business was in fact 6 weeks. So within 6 weeks, they were deriving value from an application that used to be a custom legacy. I called it the Thomas Excel nightmare because it was really, really good, but it crashed after about 15 users logged in. So it became kind of cumbersome. So they had to migrate off to the cloud. But in conclusion, and just to kind of wrap this up, for Bell's purposes, what they wanted to do was find a cloud, lightweight application that could look across their entire supply chain. And then they want to embed machine learning and artificial intelligence on top of that says, hey, you know what, we're going to launch a promotion. And this promotion is going to be on a specific geography. And we want to take the West as an example. So if we're going to go after the West, do we have the right staging? Do we have the right products? Are we positioned across our entire multi-echelon supply chain to support that campaign? Another scenario, you order 25,000 iPhones, 10,000 iPhones arrive. How do you determine who gets those 10,000 iPhones? Well, now using the history of what we have in the actual enterprise, we can determine that from a profitability-based metric, that we should probably distribute this to this location, and these geographies as the priorities. So I just want to leave with kind of 3 concluding thoughts, and I make sure I capture them correctly here. Cloud deploys faster, everybody knows this, and the upfront costs are significantly lower. You're not spinning up a new server, adding space in your rack. Also, cloud accelerates the innovation. What I mean by that specifically, if I use the example of supply chain, we have global teams that are innovating the solution every 90 days. So every 90 days in the back end of the solution, you're getting an update that you're not even aware of that introduces a whole new level of functionality to your solution that you already have in place. And then my personal favorite is the lower barrier to entry. What I mean by that is my father runs a very small business. He's a small entrepreneur. He's doing quite well, but he has tools available to him that historically have been to the exclusive billion-dollar business organizations. Now he can actually get an AI and an ML type algorithm and look across his supply chain as an example. So cloud has really changed the game, both from an adoption and the cost and the availability.
Thanks, Glenn. And for us, the cloud has been around for a few years now and counting, and is now considered mainstream for business and consumers. Where does Microsoft Canada see it going, and why is it so important?
Sure. So cloud has been, we've been seeing the cloud adoption going very strong across the industry for some time. And one of the things that we see is our customers really appreciate the idea of having the flexibility and the elasticity of the tools and technologies that are available to them. Just adding to the point that Glenn just mentioned. Also, people really like the idea of focusing on what really is important to you without worrying about infrastructure management and all the fun that we have with IT. So cloud is really important, and one of the things that we see in cloud is people, the time to market is really reduced with the adoption of cloud, because you're not spending a lot upfront, and this sort of culture, this really fosters the innovation culture in the organizations. For example, your innovation teams do not need to purchase the hardware upfront, because the experimentation teams, they need to work along the way to figure out whether something matters, whether something makes sense for them, whether something really gives the value to the organization or not. So the adoption of cloud really reduces the barrier of upfront infrastructure investment. Another thing that we are seeing, which is increasingly, is that our enterprise organizations are increasingly updating their governance and compliance processes to work on cloud. And we as a Microsoft are investing hugely on making sure that our cloud platform Azure is secure and compliant to the enterprise governance standard.
Thank you. And Kim, how are you seeing cloud computing used to transform your business clients?
Sure. So when we talk about cloud, there are really 3 things that we're talking about. They're all a little bit separate. So there's software as a solution, which is what Glenn was referring to, the SAP platform. There's platform as a service, which is Microsoft Azure, and AWS, Amazon service, and Google. Those would be the big names for platform. And then there's infrastructure as a service, and that can be in your own data center, virtualization, etc. But those are 3 kind of distinct things. Glenn mentioned this a little bit. For startups, the advent of the cloud is really awesome because you can very quickly get a reliable, agile technology with scope you wouldn't have been able to afford in the old on-prem world. So that's really good if you're a startup, but most of the clients I deal with aren't startups. They're legacy in some capacity. Some of them have been around for a while, and some of them are a little bit newer. And we're seeing folks being cautious about moving forward. And a really interesting example, I was working with one of the large banks here in Toronto, and they wanted to put a new subledger in for a small part of their business. And so they went out to the major providers. And one of the providers refused to offer on-prem, and they weren't ready to go cloud. They're thinking about it, they weren't ready, so they ended up choosing a different. In the end, we found out that that company was only paying its account reps if they were selling cloud-based solutions. Like if you sold on-prem, you didn't get any commission. So you can see there's a little bit of a push from some of the traditional vendors to move into this market because they need to be able to compete with some of the native cloud solutions. And hopefully that's not offensive to you, but and I just want to mention again with software as a service, there is still a project involved, but it's not typically as onerous as if you're doing a very large on-prem. If you're doing very large on-premise, you have this big design phase, you have typically a build phase where you're customizing the software to your specific needs, and then you test it pretty heavily. But when you're doing software as a service, typically you're looking just for the gaps. Where is there a problem for me? And then a lot of the effort is on change management because you become a process taker, right? The software works the way the software works, and so you have to change your organization. So we are seeing the software goes in more quickly, but you can't underestimate the amount of change management activity that you have to do to get user adoption and for people to feel good about how that all went. And I think, the cloud, this is the three topics we're going to talk about today. They're all a little bit interlinked, right? But I also work with manufacturing companies and logistics companies and others where there's a lot of data coming off sensors of different descriptions. So with Internet of Things and with Internet of Everything, there's this huge amount of data available, and we'll talk a little bit later about some specific applications. But some of these applications you need, well, if you needed to do this on the equipment you have in your data center, if you needed to do the big analysis on all these vast amounts of data, it would be very expensive. And so with cloud as a platform, you have the opportunity to spin up and down how much capacity that you need. And so you can do very short bursts of very intense analysis, and it's way more cost efficient, and in fact, you probably wouldn't be able to afford to do it yourself. So those are some of the things we're thinking. And just one last point, because my colleagues would find me remiss if I didn't talk about security. Because a lot of folks, one of the big concerns they have going to the cloud is actually security. And our cyber guys will tell you, cloud can be just as safe as on-premise if you do it right. And doing it right means involving the security folks early in the conversation so it's not an afterthought. And because identity and access management is something you need to be thoughtful about. The encryption and tokenization you need to be thoughtful about. And another really important part is to consider that provider as an outsourcer and treat them with the appropriate governance and make sure they have the appropriate security around their offering and infrastructure, et cetera. Because it's going to be, part of you. And we saw in the news today, there are some very determined people in the world doing all kinds of interesting things. So, but we're starting to see enterprise clients get a little bit more comfortable to put more things in the cloud, and they're being driven there because the business is asking to take advantage of some of this, new and disruptive technology.
Correct. I see the same trend. When it first started, there was a humongous reluctance, especially in IT, of changing the model and security. And today, less reluctance, but very niche-oriented for the start. So before we go on to the next topic, are there any questions in the audience? Okay, you can keep them all for the end as well. So No worries about that. So the next topic, again, artificial intelligence, a topic that is so broad and vast that it's a little bit scary to most of us. So for us, the scope of AI is vast, right? Could you describe what artificial intelligence actually means at Microsoft, or means to Microsoft?
Sure. Artificial intelligence is a key technology for Microsoft and is one of the main focus areas for Microsoft in the last few years. Microsoft has been investing. So our vision is basically the same as what our vision was about personal computing, which was making it accessible and available to each and every person on the planet. The vision is the same for the AI. We wanted to make AI accessible and available to each and every person on the planet. We have been investing on our research labs. We have several research labs around the world. One of the very active lab in Montreal as well, in Canada. They are building some very innovative cognitive solutions for our platform. Microsoft has been infusing artificial intelligence in all of our product lines across. For example, you might have seen the resume builder in Microsoft Word, the job recommender in LinkedIn, Cortana Intelligence in Windows, and our intelligent cloud resizing platform for our Azure platform. Besides that, Microsoft is also investing heavily in what we call the AI for humanity. And I don't know if you have seen a very interesting app that Microsoft recently came up with. It's called Seeing AI, SEEING, Seeing AI. It's available on iPhone and Android, and it is basically a talking camera app for visually impaired people. So if you are visually impaired, you can just swipe your glasses, and it will actually narrate the world around you. So a very interesting use case, and it's part of Microsoft initiative called AI for Humanity. On the enterprise innovation, on the enterprise AI adoption side, we do support the common AI and machine learning based technologies, but something that we also offer is what we call the cognitive services. So these are the custom built, pre-built models for complex AI tasks. For example, for reading comprehension, for speech recognition, for language translation, and maybe for image and object recognition. So it's a very interesting time for AI at Microsoft and across the industry.
Thank you. And Glenn, could you just give us a little bit of the background of what it means to SAP?
Sure, absolutely. By show of hands, who's SAP in the house here? Who uses SAP? Okay, wow. Some work to do. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, it's the opposite usually. So, first, just a couple of comments about SAP. I mean, we're a 40-plus-year-old software company. Somewhere north of 70% of the world's GDP transactions touch an SAP system at some point. So obviously it's well distributed, and with that becomes significant responsibility. But to stay on task with the topic around artificial intelligence, and Maura, you said it perfectly, is there's a lot of confusion and complexity. So I like to make it Sesame Street simple. And artificial intelligence is really just the broader concept of machines being able to carry out standardized tasks in a way that we would consider smart. And I would add to that, derive business intelligence from it as well. So you've got standard tasks that deliver intelligence. And what we're most excited about at SAP, at artificial intelligence, is the boring stuff. And I probably shouldn't use the phrase the boring stuff at a CPA conference, so I'll be cautious in how I talk about this, but I'll refer to it as the mundane, minimal value adds, and I'll give you 3 examples of it. So, classifying transactions for tax compliance, predicting when contracts based on usage will need to be renewed, or predicting and acting on stock in-transit delays. So these are things that artificial intelligence can manage very effectively today. So McKinsey actually has gone out and estimated that 40% of financial processes can actually be fully automated using AI. And then Gartner has gone on to say that they actually believe that AI will account for 500 million people's savings of 2 hours this year alone. So you can see it's just starting to hit that tipping point, crossing the chasm before that, but it is starting to get that actual more commonplace, much as cloud is today. So what I want to talk around is, what does AI mean? And give you three real kind of tangible case scenarios here. And AI at SAP is about automation, doing things that we couldn't actually do before in interaction. So talk quickly about automation. So automation, a great example of that, if you're Canada's largest energy company, Suncor, you've been doing IoT for a while. So IoT, the acronym, Internet of Things, and you've been taking your truck telemetry of these massive 797 Caterpillar trucks. These are basically apartment buildings on their side with 6 wheels. And you're taking that data and you're putting it up in the cloud. But now what do you do with it? How do you orchestrate that? How do you make meaningful data of that? How do you derive insight to action from that? And a quick example of that is we're actually now taking this data, ingesting it in our cloud, comparing it to the lookup tables or the actual published documents from Caterpillar, and then saying, hey, we've got a spike in a threshold of a temperature or a vibration or something that represents an anomaly. Using our predictive analytics algorithm, we suggest that this asset is going to fail on Tuesday. So what do we do with that? The insight, now we know what's going to happen. The action is, let's reserve an actual service bay. Let's secure the parts so we have them on hold. And let's also secure a technician to go dispatch them to look at the truck in advance of it actually breaking down. So that's a cool early example of the automation stuff. And that's kind of unique to the larger organizations like SAP, Microsoft, and others, because we have such a rich data of enterprise context. Another one is things that weren't possible before. Who's watching the NHL? Who's watching the playoffs right now? Playoffs game 1 last night, right? Okay, and then there's the series beforehand. So artificial intelligence, believe it or not, is being used in that example. And how it's being used is the image capturing recognition of AI has gotten so good today that it can now recognize faces, buildings, facades, things like that. So it say this is a 19th century building and interpret it as that. What's really interesting is if you apply it to the commercial relevance of, as the camera spans across the ice as the puck shoots up, how much time does each logo on the board receive of camera time? How big is the audience? So what AI is actually able to do is capture that and then mathematically say, here's how much exposure you're getting, and here's what you're paying. So I want you to look at the next game, whenever that is, I'm not sure it's whenever it is. The point of the story is SAP's logos are on the boards, usually just to the left or just to the right behind the goalies, or in the playoff series leading up, it was just to the left, just to the right, and then also right in front of the actual player's bench, because these are the premium spots that would get the highest actual displays. And then the last one, AI, I'm really excited about. Who uses Siri? Siri's like my best friend and my worst enemy some days. I dictate stuff that really should not be dictated and comes out completely garbled. But the point of the story is SAP has now introduced something called Copilot. I consider it like Siri, but for enterprise. So an example of Copilot is I can actually go on my phone, on any smartphone, open the application and say, hey Copilot, can you please tell me my actual to budget for travel for 2018? And in a moment's notice, it will come back after about 20 seconds or less, depending on my connection, which is usually good because it's with Bell. So it's fast, super fast. So what happens is it'll come back and say, actually Glenn, with your trip booked for Berlin, and this is legitimate, you're 12% over your Q2 budget based on the reservations of the hotel, the price of your hotel ticket, and your per diem, all rolled up. So I've actually got alerts that are already showing, and it's giving me the data in real time. So it's a little bit scary, because I used to be able to say, oh, I wasn't quite sure. Now I can't complete it quite so much, but those are some examples.
Great, and just question in the audience, how many people are actually experimenting at AI in their workplace today? Some form of AI. Okay, because it is starting, whether it's, I know in our organization, I'm in the bread and butter organization where we're actually counting things, but we are starting to use robotic process automation and going from the dumb robots more and migrating more to the more intelligent robots, but it's, in the case of my organization, a little bit slow in the accounting. I'm in the accounting world, so anyhow. So with that, Kim, how are you advising your clients either how to run or transform their businesses and strategies to reap the benefits of AI?
So we think about it a little bit differently, right? We think about it, what's the business issue you're trying to solve, and then we figure out which of the tools that we now have available to us. And I mean, it's amazing how quickly technology is changing. Quite honestly, you heard Maura say how old I am basically at the beginning of the presentation. I've been in the technology space for quite a while now, and I've never seen the speed and rate of change that we're seeing now, and the adoption of it. It's amazing how short the cycle is becoming. So in the AI space, as Maura mentioned, what we're finding is most of our clients are still kind of dabbling. They're not using it in a really enterprise level yet. But one exception, and I'll share this use case with you, is actually Microsoft. And I had to check with Faraz before we came in here to make sure he wasn't going to tell the story. He would have stolen my thunder. But Microsoft, for their financial forecasting, is actually using machine learning. And I'll just explain a little bit why. So they used to have hundreds of analysts across 80 geographies spend 2 to 3 weeks to do their quarterly forecast. And they weren't very happy with that because they found, first of all, it was expensive, it was Excel-based, so it was error-prone, and leadership was saying, your accuracy is not meeting our expectations. So what they started doing, I think maybe 18 months ago or so, is they started some machine learning experiments. And they started leveraging internal data and also some external data sources. And they piloted in small, pieces of their business to different channels or different lines of business. And then they were validating. So actually, probably now in the back half of last year, when they talk to their analysts about forecast, they are using a machine learning generated financial forecast. So, that's pretty impressive. And we've seen, they were early adopters, as Microsoft tends to be. But we're seeing we've got global pharma clients, we've got large retailers, et cetera, who are now just on this use case starting to use it. And then you might say, oh my God, but doesn't that mean your enterprise financial data is in the cloud? And from a security perspective, there's lots of security around it. Even the data at rest is under encryption. So that's just one use case.
Perfect. And how are you seeing AI changing the audit profession?
So I'm not an auditor or an accountant. I'm an engineer, and why there are camps sometimes between the engineers and the accountants. But this topic I find really interesting, and it's broadly, the regulators and the policymakers are really struggling with what to do around a bunch of the new technologies. And so just last week, the PAOCB, who is the regulator of auditors who audit SEC clients, they called the Big Four into a meeting just last week on this topic of how are we going to regulate AI, and they were looking for some discussion. And so there's two perspectives on that. There's how are you going to audit clients who are leveraging AI in their enterprise, and then the second part is how are you going to regulate the auditors who are leveraging AI to do the audits. So some of the key questions, because quite frankly there's no decisions being made on this yet, some of the key questions are, do you need to understand how the decisions that are leveraging algorithms that are changing all the time, do you need to understand how those decisions are made or not? Because management makes lots of decisions that the auditors don't really question. They look at how, the outcome. So that's one debate that's going on. Another is even what standards are we going to use to leverage when we're giving assurance around AI? So that's kind of on the client side. The discussion on that audit from an auditor perspective has been how is the regulator going to know that the tools that we are using in the audit are providing the right outcome? And so that's, I think, is really fascinating, because then there's a whole ethical question around AI. There's lots of debate going on. It's so early, this stuff is not sorted out. But today, there's limited use. Even as auditors, we're using it kind of to test some things. We're using it to check where maybe some exceptional transactions might be. We're not really using it in the heart of the audit. And that's partially because we're waiting to find out how all this is going to, where it's all going to end.
That's what we're witnessing at our end. And now they're starting to actually read our contracts mechanically, just so the machine can start to learn, not to use it yet, but just so that it can learn and to train the machine how to properly.
Well, and that's
To
another
reuse.
question the regulator has, right? If you're using AI algorithms, are you using that algorithm and you're just deploying it in a single client and so it is learning exclusively on that client? Or are you deploying the algorithms to multi-clients and are you consolidating all that information? So it's some really interesting questions still open.
That's it, and even in your consulting mandates, as you're looking for, as resources become very scarce internally, you're trying to figure out, when you're engaging a CPA firm for non-audit work, how they can use tools to speed up the process or to reduce the manual effort. So there is a big impetus for this change throughout, both being requested by the customers, not to be audited, mind you, but to reap the benefits of an efficient process. So just for us, how are you seeing AI being rolled out in Canada with Microsoft?
Yeah, so Canada is the pioneer in modern AI.
What do you mean by that? Sorry.
It's the pioneer in modern AI. So the modern AI algorithms were actually built right in Toronto, in University of Toronto, by professors at University of Toronto. And we are actually the global leaders in AI research. Most of the AI innovation is actually happening in Canada itself, in the Quebec area, Montreal, and Toronto. We are pretty active in this, and we also see the same reflection in the industry as well. We have a very welcoming attitude towards the adoption of AI in our businesses and services. Almost all the clients that we work with are either already using AI today to improve their business practices and to improve their business services, or they are actually working on cloud adoption strategy, because that is one step that they need to take before they can actually start using AI. And like across the industry, like for example, from financial institutions and retail organizations, they are using AI for preemptive actions. For example, they are using AI to detect and prevent a fraud before it happens. They are trying to identify the security incidents before they can compromise the networks and the enterprise infrastructure. The other organizations are using AI to better understand their customers, to understand the customer journey across, and to provide the more personalized services to the customers, treating every customer as an individual and not just bombarding everyone with the same promotional or marketing material, right? And manufacturing industries are using AI for preventive maintenance. I think Glenn also touched on that one as well. Healthcare is using AI for preventive diagnosis and early preventive and early diagnosis as well. So we are seeing that the organizations across the industry are adopting AI in Canada at a very rapid pace. There are still few issues that the organizations are actually dealing with. One of the more recent phenomena that we have seen growing and developing in organizations is that people are starting to question about the ethics of AI. Just because we have the data, can we do anything that we can do with the data? Like, what is the notion of the privacy and our own rights when it comes to the data protection and data usage? So, for example, we at Microsoft has a specialized committee which is called the AI Ethics Committee. So, anytime we want to infuse AI in any of our product or in any of our services, it must go through the AI Ethics Committee. And we are seeing similar practices being rolled out across the industry as well, especially large organizations, because people are getting more sensitive about the data, and organizations are also getting more sensitive, especially after the Facebook incident happened earlier this year.
Thank you. Just a general question. Other than tech companies, but what industries would you say are the leaders in early adoption of AI?
Financial institutions are actually some very interesting work. Almost all the financial institutions that I work with, they are actually building the bot frameworks, so using the conversational AIs. For example, you were replacing the manual HR support with the bots. People are actually, some of the financial organizations are actually building the robo advisors, as they call them, to advise you on the investment decisions as well. There are, I think, several in production now. So we see a very huge trend in the financial organizations.
Okay. Glenn, Kim, are you
Yeah.
observing the same?
I agree, Faraz. I mean, my one area that I've seen a significant uptick is HR and the screening of applicants. It's a rather mundane task, maybe not necessarily the highest value task, but so you get thousands of applications using AI to actually filter it down. I know some of the consulting companies are actively doing this today. They have projects come up, they need to actively staff for these projects, and then they'll use AI to say, okay, here's the top 10 candidates, and everything else gets pushed up to the side. So it's an effective, efficient way to do it.
You have to make sure you hit all of the right spots on your resume.
Yeah, I don't know what the right keywords are any longer.
But, I mean, AI is not new, right? The banks and payment companies have been using AI for more than 20 years. If you think about fraud detection on credit cards, that's been around for a long time. But what's changed is now we have cloud computing, so you can get access to large capacity to do this analysis. Data is more good. So that has made it so that there are other use cases. So we're seeing other industries. There's a large energy company whose name has already been mentioned today. I mean, they have been using autonomous vehicles on their, I guess you could call it, mining operations for some time now, but they can't come out of pilot because the regulations aren't set for how they need to do this, right? So they have their pilot project, that's okay, but they can't expand it, and they've been ready for a while.
So basically, what we're saying, I mean, it's just a continuation of all of the process automation. Now we have so much speed and capacity behind it that now everything can go on overdrive over the next few years
Challenge will be challenged.
to manage it.
Can you find the people you need to put all these use cases into production? Because there's some skills that are very difficult to buy, and it takes a while to grow them.
Meaning mathematics and
Data
engineering.
scientists and
More new letters to get. Sorry. So, Kim, what do you see as meaning the main business case to drive AI?
We're seeing folks are talking about simplification or convenience for customers. Productivity is still a big driver, although it's really interesting. There was this wave of process robotics that came through Canada, started maybe, I think, 2 years ago perhaps. And originally when we started talking to clients about it, that was all about headcount reduction. And that's not the discussion anymore. The discussion is a little bit more sophisticated now. It's about freeing up capacity to allow people to work smarter. And AI is just an extension of that. And you'll find very few clients who will talk about AI as a workforce reduction tool. But, one example, sometimes there's just this question that is bugging you can't find the answer to. So we were working with a large grocer, and last September, they said, we always order the same amount of this yogurt in September, and we never have a problem. And this year, we had terrible overstock, and it's a perishable good, doesn't stay on the shelf very long, and so we lost a ton of money. And we don't understand, because every year we've done this, and every year it's been fine. And so we worked with them, and we leveraged some startups who were coming in with some algorithms that we thought would suit the problem. And it was very interesting. One of the variables that turned out to be very important was weather. Last September was extremely warm, unusually warm, this kind of warm that we're experiencing now. And apparently there are certain flavors of yogurt that we do not buy when it's hot. So they are now using their this algorithm in their merchandising and planning, at least for that category. I'm not sure how far they've expanded it to include certain things like butter. Oh, can I mention one more thing? As I was very surprised to hear you mention tax classification. But at EY, we are actually using AI to help with tax classification. As you can imagine, sometimes our tax folks, they'll have thousands and thousands of transactions that they need to figure out where does this belong. And so in the use case that we were working on, I think there were 450,000 transactions that needed to be classified, and that used to take about an hour in transaction. And now we had loaded 2 years of history, and the algorithms are able to produce the same results in 120 hours. So it's a 73% reduction on just that. So again, you see the use cases we're talking about, some of them are very, very discrete, but as you start to aggregate these together, you're freeing up just huge amounts of time that people can go away and do more value-added activity.
There's always benefits to be had. You just have to look for them and making sure that you have the right business case. So, all interesting. So, does anybody in the audience have any questions on AI? Is that a hand up at the back? No. Lunch, yes. That's true.
Specific cases or tools that you recommend for companies with a smaller size of business. There's some big companies for sure, but there are many small size businesses that don't have necessarily the same access to capital investment to this.
Okay, did everyone get the question? Basically, the question was whether or not there were any tools that a small company could use, a small medium company could get access to that could leverage artificial intelligence more economically, correct? Okay, perfect.
So our EY's leader for intelligent automation, I think, is in the room. But what Biren will tell you is, Biren Agni-Hotri, he spoke earlier if you want to try to find him later. But there are so many startups and small ventures that it's the race to the best algorithm. And that's not necessarily an expensive thing to leverage. So, there are benefits. You have the benefit of the R&D dollars that the large companies like SAP and Microsoft and others can afford to spend. But there's also an incredible amount of startup activity in this space. And as Faraz mentioned, Canada is a hotbed, like Toronto, Montreal, even I think Edmonton, I believe, right, is the third hub city. So there's lots of opportunity. The challenge is sifting through to find out what might be of biggest use for you, but that requires you to understand where you think you might be looking.
I wouldn't say that as well. Small and medium companies are not burdened by their legacy environments as well,
So
right?
much easier if you're newer. Like the plumbing for large enterprises in Canada, it's really hard. I've been working with the banks for a long time, and there's just some things that it's going to be really hard to replace. And if you're a newer, smaller, you don't have that same challenge. So.
Right. Certainly much more agile. Any other questions? Comments? Okay, so big data. So now we talked about artificial intelligence. We can go after actually the big data is the underlying requirement that you need to really leverage and take your artificial intelligence to the next level. So essentially, Faraz, obviously big data continues to be a hot topic. Where does Microsoft see the major focus, and how should CPAs prepare themselves, their customers, and their employers for big data?
Big data used to be a hype and very hot topic a couple of years back. I think AI is a new hot topic in the industry, but keeps changing. But seriously speaking, when it comes to the big data, what we see in the industry is that there is a growing interest within organizations to build what they call the enterprise data lake, which is a one-stop data solution, one-stop data shop for the entire organizations. Because we all are collecting a lot of data. We have different and a lot more touch points with our customers than we used to have, which results in generating a lot more data. So there's a huge demand in actually fusing all of that data together so that we can make smart decisions. So this is one of the trends that we see, building the enterprise data lake is a very important and very growing area of interest for the organizations. Another thing, one thing that I would want to mention for the CPAs and anyone who wants to build big data and AI-based solution is that not all solutions actually require big data. Right? A lot of solutions can be built with smaller data sets. Right? So big data is just a collection of all the data that organizations have, but not all solutions require that much volume of the data. You can actually benefit from the smaller volume of the data. One thing that I think is important to understand when it comes to the big data and cloud world is that we have now a notion of separation of data storage, compute infrastructure, and the technologies that you use to process your data. They used to be very tightly coupled in the database area, where you have your data stored in database and tables, and you can only use this data with a certain query language, and often even the infrastructure is tied to that particular platform, right? So this sort of tight coupling no more holds in the world of big data. You can have your data in one place, you can use variety of technologies to use this data, and you can use variety of infrastructure to actually manage and run your compute environments. Another point I wanted to make is that for anyone who wants to adopt big data or want to work in big data, I think one thing that is very important to establish is that what does big data and AI means for your organization. Right? How is your organization going to benefit with the big data and AI? How are they going to use? How would it integrate with your current systems? Your current systems are not designed to work with the big data platform, which is largely open source, right? So how would you integrate that, and how would you actually run this in operation? Right? So all of these are very important questions that you need to think about before you go about building the solutions. And we see a lot of solutions being built because one of the key trends that we see is that people hire a bunch of data scientists and they ask them to see what sort of AI problems can be solved in organizations without considering how would these solutions integrate with our current solutions. How would your analyst actually use this? How would it run in automation? So this is a missing piece which we see that results in a lot of projects being end up not going into production. I think these are a few things which I think might help to anyone who is new to this adoption.
Thank you. And Glenn, as an SAP shop, I'm aware of how much data SAP actually spews out.
It's a compliment, right?
Pardon?
It's a compliment.
Yes, it is, but it's never enough. But anyhow, big data analytics has been a major focus of SAP over the last few years. What do you see as the key benefits and risks, I guess, to all this data?
It's an interesting time too, because Faraz, you touched on it as well, is that we're at this unprecedented intersection where data is readily available. What I mean by that is IoT sensors just seem to be plugged in and ubiquitous to everything. You can buy a $3 sensor for your toaster that tells your alarm clock that you're late and starts the toaster and the coffee early because there's going to be a traffic jam. It's a little bit far-fetched out there, but the point of the matter is data is just pervasive. Second as well, computer processing power is quite inexpensive today. And then the element of storage is also really inexpensive. So data orchestration and data pipeline management, these are the two critical themes that organizations are wrestling with today. Data orchestration and data pipeline management. And just also one other concept too is the newer concept of leaving stuff at the edge. Are you guys familiar with the term means something to anybody? Data at the edge? Perfect, some nods out there. So basically what that's implying is leaving data at the actual physical device. So if you're in manufacturing, you can start to leverage your SCADA, your HMI, your PLCs, and all the investment you made on the industrial stuff, and you can have a data mart there, we'll call it a link, but a data mart there, and have it on demand. So there's some interesting different ways, but really what happens often is we get customers come to us and say, hey, we got this data, we want to do a project, show us what we can do. And often you don't need big data to do it, as you said it, because when we get 3.5 years of high resolution data, it's missing data, quite often there's gaps. Naming conventions have changed, new indices have happened, so it's quite often we end up just going back to start from the very beginning. But the point of the story is big data doesn't have to be a big mess. If you have a strategic purpose behind it, all the better. So it's not so much about, let me record every single keystroke I've ever made since my first Hotmail account in '92. It's more realistic to, hey, I have this specific interest area, I want to reduce critical downtime in X, reduce uptime in Y, reduce injuries at work, and things like that. That's where you can get really meaningful projects out of it. By the way, like shop floor to top floor, that was a 20 years ago concept that we brought forward. Then IT/OT, that was another one. It's the convergence of IT and OT data, IoT and IIoT. So all the different buzzwords. So big data is not a surprise, but what I really want to just comment on is what are the benefits? What are we seeing the positives of big data? And what's super amazing is big data is actually giving birth to new industries that didn't exist before. A perfect example is Kaiser Compressor, a world-class manufacturer of compressors. They have been in their business their whole entire lives of making a compressor, manufacturing, distributing, and selling a compressor. That model is actually flipped on its head, and now what they do is sell compressed air on demand. So it's actually become a service organization. This is a company that would never ever imagine themselves being a service organization, but with the advent of IoT, ML, AI, and big data, they're now providing this as a service organization. Another example, going back to kind of an athletic theme for a second, the German Cup. So the German soccer team, SAP is headquartered in Germany. The German soccer team used SAP's actual big data, artificial intelligence, and actually put sensors in the field and sensors on the players, and were recording risk injury profiles. So it was pretty quick to actually determine that I would maybe benchmark myself against Kim and Faraz, that I was good at this or could be better at that. But what came out of that actual study was they were able to determine, compared to the competitors, the German soccer players, football players, there as they call it, were actually having ball possession an average of 4.3 seconds. With this data, they actually went back to the coaches and said, the average is about 1.5 seconds. They actually attribute the World Cup winning for this coaching that brought them down to 1.4 seconds. So in summary, they won a little bit on the actual technology and innovation front, and I'm sorry for any Argentina fans because it didn't go in your favor, but these are some really amazing ideas. And so big data doesn't have to be necessarily big and cumbersome. These are things that you can do very lightweight, agile, as I said earlier, 6 weeks, pick a project, pick a focus, and have a conversation.
Perfect, thank you. So, just a general question, and I apologize. Are you seeing big data being used more from an operational level or from a finance level, or a marriage of the two?
Oh, I gotta jump in on that. I'm on the front lines. I'm an operations guy, an engineering manufacturing background is my space. So I'm actually seeing that they're being married together. So now I want to look at downtime, throughput, availability, quality, and I want to use a financial metric on this. And we've talked around this for 20 years, but never really delivered on it until recently, where we're in fact taking that enterprise data and then being able to contrast and combine the two together. And the insights are super compelling. One of our construction companies here in Canada, it's basically been in the news lately, they've done a recent project where they actually put vests with CO2 detectors on the actual workers. And what they did from that was they actually did some productivity studies. But it was a byproduct, because the actual first purpose of the actual vest was to alert them to CO2 levels, and then also actually notify their actual safety team to come and help if there was an event. But the point of the story is they've actually taken that and actually turned that into financial efficiency models, because you were able to actually see where the workers were. And they actually realized they had a really effective workforce. So as an example, they would start at 7 a.m. and have their first break at 10, but some days they wouldn't take their break till like 10:30. They'd be like, well, why'd you guys not take your break till 10:30? It's like, well, we're at this critical point in the process that it was just better to push through, complete this task. And then the beautiful part is now all of a sudden we have that operational data, marry that with the financial, the health and safety risk, and you've got a real 360-degree view of your actual operation.
Perfect, thank you. And Kim, how are you advising your clients to drive value from big data?
It's a really good question. There's no magic bullet. Everybody's data is terrible. And so it's a really big struggle. And we were talking earlier, we have clients, you guys are going through this now with all the IFRS stuff, 9, 15, 61. It's really hard for everybody. So, but here's just a small example of sometimes people don't understand, when you're right at source and you're collecting the data, they don't understand the implications. So here's an example from one of the banks. And in their commercial lending group, as part of account open or whatever, whenever you're doing a transaction, they want you to capture the SIC code. And the way the SIC codes are in their system, it's alphabetical. You got to page through a whole bunch of stuff to find what you're looking for. So guess what? Quite often, the person doesn't care, and they just pick a code. Well, those codes are leveraged by the risk teams to do really important work around what financial exposures are, what risk of bad debt there is, for different industries, etc. But the inputs were crap because people were randomly. So once the field workers, right, those people who were opening the accounts and were doing the transactions understood the value of that particular piece of data, they changed their behavior. So I'm telling you this because to fix some of the big data, we have these data lakes now that I like to call data swamps because the data goes in and I don't know, it just kind of, nothing comes out that's very useful. But if we're not thoughtful about putting the data in the first place, we're never going to get a data set that's of high value.
Correct, and I can speak from experience as well, that, you don't really know how bad your data is until you have to actually use it for a different purpose, right? And especially when you have a lot of legacy systems, I mean, the idea of having a data czar or, somebody in charge of chief data officer, I mean, those are things that are coming around today because of the quality of data. And it's really interesting. We're asking our systems, our accounting systems, to do accounting transactions based on data points that were never important to the, especially like in leasing, for example. I mean, operating leases, they were basically set up to actually pay the lease on a regular basis, not to set up a capital lease, not to actually have data points on judgments, etc. So you're just going through this exercise. It's quite interesting, and then your first thought is, I have SOX as a background, is we'll have to put a control on that, right, at the front end, and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to stop operations, right? That's not how you're supposed to work. But all of those things are coming together, and data, and having great data scientists and whatnot that understand the data before you start to look at it has been important to us.
Can I give you just one example of a client that did something interesting? I'm not going to go into the details about the data, but there's a global agriculture company that is being faced with what we would call mega trends. So there's some really high order things impacting their business. The first is population is outstripping food production. It's a pretty big one, right? And the second is consumers are now more concerned about the origin of their food and are things that used to be productivity improvements on production, productivity of soil and crops, etc. Consumers don't want that anymore. For example, the whole non-GMO thing. So things that they used to do to try to alleviate this, we don't have enough food, they can't use anymore. And so they're trying to figure out, okay, we've got these macro things that are changing about how we need to run our business. Because if we don't, we're going to lose relevance to our customers, and our partners aren't going to want to work with us. And they were actually thinking about doing a traditional order-to-cash re-implementation. They thought that might be a good solution now. Any of you who've done traditional order-to-cash, that's probably a 3 to 5 year project, and it wasn't going to transform them. It was just going to maybe slightly modernize them. And your customers aren't going to wait. Your partners aren't going to wait for you to do that and not be there at the end. So they looked at it differently. They said, okay, well, what if we do a new e-commerce platform and we marry up some predictive analytics with that? And so now, because they happen to have a vast amount of data on many different things, and they can pull from some external forces. So now they have a much more modern e-commerce site, but it allows folks, farmers, to kind of pick the best seed or understand the best activities to get the most production they can for their specific, crop and location environments. And so that, completely transformed a business that was under threat and is also, doing good for humanity, hopefully, along the way.
Super. Any other last thoughts on big data? Any questions on the audience? Go ahead.
To implement the enterprise data lake and also the PaaS, one challenge is to overcome the resistance to IT because they're not just the security, but also they're going into the territory. So can you provide some advice how to manage the relationship, how to overcome that? Because I'm from the business side, we need to really work with the IT.
Did everyone hear the question? Okay, so I'll try to summarize it and correct me if I'm wrong here, but in this case, it was a business user trying to create a data lake and wondering what are the best strategies working with IT, because now as a user, you're moving into a territory that's generally managed and controlled by IT. So there was a comment to the panel, I guess, what they're seeing and any recommendations that you can make.
Okay. So, a couple of things come to mind with that question. One is, I think Maura, you mentioned the data czar, right? But folks are putting senior executives into roles where they're responsible for the data, and that's typically outside of IT. And there's a whole bunch of work being done now around data governance and understanding data as an asset and kind of getting, because I think to do this well, there's always a tension between business and IT. It doesn't matter what you're doing, and it's a healthy tension. It needs to be there. But if you really have a business case for what you're doing, then it's much easier to get cooperation. It's when, I come from a management consulting background and from industry, but I've been doing technology for a long time, so I kind of bias towards the technology side. But one of the things that's really frustrating is when the business just gets really enamored with a tool, and we just want to implement something because, wow, somebody came in and it was really sexy and I really liked it. Because you always need to go back to what's the business purpose? What am I trying to do? Not the how, what am I trying to do? Why am I trying to do it? Because when you are very outcome focused, usually a lot of that tension can be resolved. But that's kind of, I'm not really specifically answering your question, but that's what we're seeing, which reduces some of that tension.
The only thing Candy said very eloquently, the thing I'd add is just back to your comment around having a strategic business imperative and making that well sponsored by your colleagues. So that it's not just a voice of one, it's a voice of many that say, this is a specific business problem that we're struggling or challenged with today, and here's some solutions. Often IT is a bit, everyone's territorial about what they do. So IT would be perhaps a little bit taken aback by, well, isn't that my job, and why wouldn't you come to me into that? I mean, I think this can be managed through, again, a strategic business imperative, maybe even some value engineering numbers that say, hey, here's the benefits that we're going to gain by doing this, and we think we should really investigate it. Now, at the same time, Kim also alluded to the fact that there's a larger context too. So you can't just look at this solution in isolation in and of itself. If you are an SAP shop, then you might look at an SAP solution. If you're a Microsoft shop, you might look at a Microsoft solution. There's lots of niche organizations that come up with shiny new objects all the time, and they present really, really well. But so my comments is getting an executive sponsorship, the business case, and then some comprehension of the macro environment that you're in today, and that will probably lead to a better conversation outcome.
Others be friends with IT as well.
Yeah, be friends. Yeah. They like coffee.
They do. Any other questions? Yes?
Faraz, you mentioned that you did open source. Do you have any suggestions in terms of how one would use the big data portion of that? Or are there strategies
It's difficult to answer, because there's no one solution which works for everyone. It depends on the use case that you are trying to build, what are your sensitivities, what are your challenges that you are facing in your current environment. Most of the big data technologies are actually open source, but different providers put their own flavors on top. For example, there is a Hortonworks platform, Cloudera platform, Databricks platform. All of these are good platforms to build the big data solutions. But I think if you want to talk more about your specific use case, maybe we can go on afterwards. it's not a single answer that I can give you, which could work for everyone.
There's a big red flash.
Yes, I see that, I see that.
It's lunch.
Getting stressed. So anyhow, this has been a really interesting discussion for me. I guess my key takeaways today, or what I've gleaned as being really quite significant, is really, starting with your problem. What are you trying to solve before you actually look at the end solution? Great thing that I've heard consistently today is talking about security, especially as we're going down into new tools, off-prem, et cetera, and how important security is and how the technologies are probably ahead of the solution or ahead of the curve now. And that really people are just starting to dabble, or what we see, or what I'm hearing from the crowd as well, and whatnot is AI is here, and a lot of people are starting to dabble with it. And it's a little bit early days still, but it is coming on, and coming on very, very strong. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for participating today, and especially our distinguished panelists for being here today, and for CPA Canada and 180 Systems for hosting such a timely and relevant discussion. So I did have one little bit of administration before letting you go for lunch. This afternoon, the solutions for today's human resource management challenges in room 104 AD have been canceled. Okay? So with that, I'll let everyone go, and thank you for attending, and enjoy the rest of your sessions. Thank you.